My name is Alice-Andrea Ewing. So I'm an artist and a sculptor, but I'm also what you call a founder sculptor, which is basically a sculptor who casts their own work. So my studio is also a foundry, and I tend to work in bronze. That's sort of the medium I generally work in, and it's also the hottest metal that we're able to work with at the foundry. And my practice is sort of divided actually into sort of three different areas. So there's my sculpture, which tends to draw on landscape sensation. It also draws a little bit on phenomenology. I'm interested in this idea of moving an idea through different materials. Actually working parts of the casting process that you'd normally delegate to others is quite important. I'm working in bronze, but I'm often producing what you call direct casts. So rather than having a mould made, like the sculpture is effectively built out of materials that can be burnt out in the kiln. And so it's cast directly, and those pieces end up becoming a sort of unique bronze sculpture opposed to an edition which I'm running multiple times. So I really enjoy sort of the proximity to the process, and the sort of physical side of the making process is really important to me. So I also manage a studio called Pomerius, which works with different gardens, casting the produce that's produced there in bronze, which is a project that actually came out of a residency in response to working in a walled garden. But because I enjoyed the outcome and also repeated it in different locations, it sort of started to develop as its own sort of studio and its own practice with this sort of idea of value underpinning it. So, and that studio now I sort of consider to be its own sort of craft design project, and so those pieces have been exhibited widely, and I'm currently collaborating with a fashion label on a jewellery collection connected to that too. And the other part of my work is participatory work. So getting people into the foundry, working a lot with schools to do casting projects, producing sculptures with students, so getting them to model in the wax, and then they're coming to the foundry watching their work being cast. And this project is sort of connected really to sort of aspiration and building confidence in younger people, really, because I think if you haven't grown up in a household where the creative arts is seen as something that's viable or important, you can't really imagine yourself working professionally in that world. So I think it's quite important to have the opportunity to meet people that actually are, and it kind of gives you an example, I suppose, something you can fall back on when people around you are telling you it isn't possible. And the fact that also working with bronze is probably not something that people are going to do again, so the opportunity to do that's probably something also that would stay in your mind. So hopefully that as a combination makes those projects quite worthwhile. Another potentially interesting aspect to my trajectory as an artist is the fact that I didn't actually go to art school. So at school, obviously I was very creative, and later on, certainly my school years, I became quite academic as well. And I always knew that I wanted to make art, wanted to work as an artist, but I also, I suppose at the time, wanted a sort of broader basis, to have like a greater number of influences to sort of draw on than what I could see was necessarily being provided at art schools, or certainly through the experience of people I already knew were at art school. So I actually ended up studying history of art instead. I studied at Cambridge, and then in my sort of second or third year, like during a really academic course, obviously, I started to write to artists basically to see if they needed any additional help. So basically sort of trying to set up some work experience, and one of the artists in that process of work experience I ended up working for was a bronze caster. So I got a part-time job, and then the rest of the week was working for them, sort of helping to load skips. Started off with really sort of like basic, not particularly technical jobs, and then gradually started to sort of learn the process by being in the studio context, and eventually was offered a job which I was basically able to sort of do learning whilst I was working. It just sort of grew organically, which I think can be quite an interesting way of sort of finding your way, particularly if you're, interested in a very particular part of a process. So, you're interested interested in etching or like within photography, you want to sort of focus on something like that. Working alongside a professional artist can be really can be a great way to learn more about that. It never actually even occurred to me before that I would work in bronze or even actually work three-dimensionally until I sort of was in the studio learning in a sort of atelier environment. So that was sort of unforeseen, but in the end obviously quite significant that I ended up in a foundry context. And I'm based in Suffolk. My studio and foundry is here. I run that with another sculptor and artist who actually met whilst I was training, and he also works with me on our participatory program, which is the Portable Foundry Project. When I first started, I was in a sort of studio collective, so there were lots of different artists, some working under the artist I was training with, and some who were sort of getting on with their own work, but we were all sort of using the same facility. And whilst, as I say, I was in this sort of atelier environment, myself and my partner decided that we really wanted to learn more about what we were doing, not just know that the furnace was on, we wanted to know what was happening when the furnace was on. And so we built a sort of mini kiln, mini furnace out of like a dustbin. And basically, when we finished working for the artist we were working for, we would just sort of start working on the little mini kiln. So there's this sort of little tiny project running alongside, which I guess in time grew and we sort of dedicated more time to learning, and eventually were able to sort of find our own space. And so I should probably mention that I grew up in Suffolk. I went to school here. I was born in the county, and so it was curious that my work experience brought me back to this part of the country. And actually, it wasn't really my intention to do that. I think all my other university options, besides Cambridge, were as far away as possible. So I was looking at sort of like Durham and York. And actually, sort of working in Suffolk's been not only an influence on the work that I'm making, as I say, it's sort of landscape based, but it's also, I suppose, been really helpful insofar as the studio that you could get here was much cheaper than trying to sort of like work a job in London to pay for a studio space there as well. And also with bronze casting, you actually need quite a lot of space to sort of undertake all the various stages of the process. So actually working in a rural context, I would say, has actually become quite important, and it's probably really defined the way that I've developed my practice.